2013, China launched the Belt and Road Initiative. It is unprecedented in terms of China's financial engagement and the innovative network-based project design. However, the project has also received mixed response. While some people have shown considerable interest in the increased connectivity this project offers, skepticism about China's potential hegemonic intentions have also prevailed. So what are these concerns, and are they legitimate? Welcome to a special sofa talk on the point, addressing the major concerns about the Belt and Road Initiative. I'm pleased to be joined by a distinguished panel of guests today. They are Clare Pearson, Chair of the British Chamber of Commerce in China; Jake Parker, Vice President of the US-China Business Council; Professor Tony Huo from the National School of Development at Peking University; and Doris Naisbitt, co-author of the book Creating a Megatrend. So welcome to this special sofa talk on the possible concerns people have about China's Belt and Road Initiative. First of all, before we address the concerns, tell us very briefly, what is this initiative in your eyes in terms of the economic potential? Claire, you want to start?
Well, I think it's possibly the most important international economic initiative that I've certainly seen in my lifetime. If you think about it, the European Union accounts for 6% of the global population, the United States 4%. Belt and Road could bring 80% of the global population onto the economic map. This is unparalleled, probably in the history of mankind. I think the reason I'm here today, Xin, I want to be here because I feel that we're at the beginning of something very important, like the beginning of the US, the beginning of the EU. This is even bigger. This is the beginning of the Belt and Road. It is a key economic issue for all the countries along it and all the countries in the world globally who will be impacted by it ultimately.
Jake, do you share that kind of high expectations?
Well, I think we have to look at it through the lens that I see it, and that's through our member company executives, large U.S. multinational companies. The U.S. is obviously not a member of the AIIB or one of the Belt and Road countries. However, when we talk to our member companies, they're very interested in the investment opportunities in the Belt and Road countries that are involved, whether it's through capital goods selling to the SOE partners, whether it's initiating projects on their own. They view it as a tremendous opportunity to continue their growth. That being said, I think there are also risks. One of the challenges with the Belt and Road today is that there is not a central driving force behind it. Though the central government has indicated that the Belt and Road is something they want to pursue, local governments, each individual provincial government has its own Belt and Road plan. Each state-owned enterprise has its own Belt and Road plan. This lack of focus could also lead to waste and in the Belt and Road Initiative. I know that in one specific example in Kazakhstan, Zhongda Oil has actually invested a significant oil refinery there, and it's now running at 6% capacity. It's receiving quite a significant amount of rejection from the local population. And this speaks to the idea where you have a significant amount of capital going into an area, you have a project that and a company that's interested in building something, but the reality is that is this money being allocated effectively?
Well, that's why we have so much discussion about all of this. But let's come back to that maybe in the discussion. Doris, what is your take on the Belt and Road?
Well, I remember very well we were writing actually another book, Global Game Change, in which we dealt with the change from a Western-centric world to a multicentric world. And it was 2013, and in doing research, I stumbled across the One Belt, One Road first mentioning. I think we were afterwards in Kazakhstan. It was so new, hardly anybody knew anything about it, except when we were in Kazakhstan, the Kazakhstan people, or the people we dealt with, it was a conference of the government, had an idea and expectations. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, there's a reason why we called our book Creating a Megatrend. Because when you look back at the megatrends that have taken place, that was all, and here I'm a little contradicting you, because I do think this is a platform on which various people jump various companies, countries, etc. But it's still just happening. For example, industrialization, digitalization, everything is taking place in a way that you have thousands and millions of different contributors. But here, this is a real initiative. This is creating something. And I think, there are many critical voices, but I prefer, and my husband and I, we prefer to take the positive side, because you have so many negative aspects. You have so many, this doesn't work, nationalism, protectionism. So here is somebody who says, or a country which sees an opportunity in bringing those to a global economic platform who by themselves are not yet able to do it. And if we look at African countries, for example, you have an enormously young population with a very high potential. But they need the platform on which this potential can grow.
Yeah, so the platform and also the will and the capacity to bring about positive changes. Professor Huo.
I was born and raised in the 20th century. My historical views from a Chinese perspective, I have never anticipated with this Belt and Road Initiative, given my historical review about China. And now, you can all imagine that for people like me, who was educated under the system. And the only thing we were taught was like 800 or 900 years ago when the Mongolians were invading. It was a terrible experience, but now, given the last 30 years change in China, where everybody have seen what happened in China, and all of a sudden this Belt and Road Initiative came up, and for me, a traditional Chinese educators, I would very much like to see a different Chinese face. I would very much like to see what had happened in 800 years ago, now has changed or shifted in different directions.
Yeah.
No, it's no more Chinese are coming. It's just, hey, we are all growing up. And then when we wake up, what we do next? When China wake up 30, 40 years ago, what China had been experimenting or what China had been gaining or what Chinese people are enjoying, maybe we can share this experience with somebody, with people along this initiative. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, for me, a drastic change, given my historical background, of course.
Yeah, very interesting.
Well, that's all very interesting observation, very interesting questions already raised. I think one thing we have to bear in mind is that we're very young in this idea, right? We're just 3-4 years, and this is a century-long idea. This is not for the next 5 years, 10 years. It's
it's
100
21st century.
For the 21st century, basically. So a lot of things is still being worked out. Let's address the first major concern that we have seen so much, we have heard so much. That is, it is China's answer to the US's pivot to Asia. Because the US was pivoting to Asia, then China wanted to go west in a way, growing its economy, but more importantly, growing its military influence in that regard. What do you think of that? Is it legitimate? And what is your answer to that?
I think it would be naive to think that a power, which gains so much ground economically, would stop and lean back and say, okay, the world wants us to be workshop of the world. This is our position. Let's live with it happily. That's an illusion. Of course, as China is maturing in many regards, it also has to expand. I mean, we're all either growing or dying. And to keep growing, China needs to go to the next level. And I think that's what China is doing now.
Well, definitely China is going to expand, China is going to grow, but the question is, are we going to threaten others and in a militarily way?
Xin, I would say there's one person who's throwing THAAD around the world, who's bombing in Syria. The person who's threatening us militarily isn't China, it's the US. And I think, really, we don't have labels. You're not Chinese. I don't see myself as British. I don't see you as American, Austrian, whatever. Yeah. I see there's two types of people in the world. There's the people who get on TV to talk about themselves, and there's countries who somebody else talks about because they do not have a voice. Mm-hmm. And I think you said China, it's new, it's waking up. who are the most interesting professors at university? The ones I used to really listen to are the ones who you'd thought they'd done that recently. So if they'd just started a business and they taught me economics, I really listened. It's about timing and atmosphere. And the epicenter of global idealism shifts over time. It might have been in Geneva and London in post-World War II Europe. It might have been in Steve Jobs' garage in 1974, let's connect the world and give everyone a PC. Sorry, an Apple. But today, I think, who else can convene a conference for 27 global leaders? What you are achieving in Beijing on the 14th and 15th of May says, it doesn't say we want to be dominant, it says everybody's coming to our party. You can't choose to be popular, you can't strategize to be important. People will follow you or they will not. And I think China, it represents a country that most recently studied the topic of opening up, of representing yourself in global governance, of not being pushed to the side and taken off the table in the post-World War II consensus, but from moving from 2001 with joining the WTO to hosting the Olympics, to hosting Expo, and now hosting the Belt and Road Conference.
And when China was joining the WTO, we were sitting in a coffee place in Beijing, and the people, we had a discussion with some Chinese, and they said, do you think that this will mean that globalization means Americanization, and we're going to Americanize? And look what has happened. And the other thing is that history sort of, doesn't it play out wonderfully? When we were starting to write about these things, nobody could have imagined in the faintest way what's going on in America. That the US would hand over a silver tray to China to step in fields where China used to be bashed for, environment, economic support, and so forth.
Yeah.
It's things are forming themselves.
What is the US companies' concern, really? Do they see it as China's ambition to expand militarily and to rival the US's influence in the world?
Well, I think our companies...
Or is it really been blown out of control by the media?
Well, when we talk to our companies, they don't think about the strategic dynamics in the relationship. It doesn't impact the work that they do here. Unless the strategic relationship is negative, then of course there are impacts on US industry. However, I think it's reasonable to assume that there is a strategic component of the Belt and Road Initiative. 80% of China's oil imports today come through the Straits of Malacca. The Belt and Road will certainly allow it to diversify the entry points for additional oil and natural gas. We've obviously seen the deep water port that's been developed in Myanmar that just began operations this week. We saw the oil pipeline going from Myanmar into Yunnan. We've got Kazakh gas and pipelines that are being developed there. Obviously, the rail connections into Europe and into Russia, which will give additional resources into China. This allows China to diversify the way that it gets its energy, and I think in that perspective, there is a certain dynamic of China being fearful of US influence in the South China Sea. And by diversifying its energy resources, that's certainly a dynamic of the Belt and Road Initiative, I think.
And
Tony?
I think for me, the most important thing is that international trade, where used to be trade in goods and services, but now it's become globalization, which means free trade plus free movements of capital and factors of productions, especially laborers, human capital, so on and so forth. So I think this Belt and Road Initiative is right in the, well, the Chinese way to put it would be 天时地利人和, means right time, right place, and right people. And I have to emphasize the word right people, because I'm an economist. When I'm always thinking about investors, I'm going to invest over there, here. But now, the relationship between investors and investees, which is our common views about economists, our economists' view about what happens in the business world, it lacks something. Cooperation. Now, we're not necessarily in financial gain from there. That's what the meaning of investors and investees. And what China, the Chinese government, with the Belt and Road Initiative now, really emphasize the cooperations, because it's not just Chinese are investing. No, everybody is investing, local governments especially, Kazakhstan and others. And so I think this Belt and Road things is going to be the first major impact on the 21st century.
There are, yes, the potential I think is huge. However, the fear really people also have, drawing from some recent example, for instance, in case of China's relationship with South Korea, with ROK, people say, look, because the political relationship has been cooling down, look, the economy is suffering, the economic cooperation between the two countries is suffering. Is that going to be the kind of case we're seeing for the Belt and Road Initiative?
I'm an economist, of course. For
Please.
me to jump into something like the relationship between China and Korea, South Korea, of course, that's not probably improper. But I would say all the political tensions would be in short terms, because I couldn't see any political tension lasting for more than 20 years, 15 years, or 5 years. Look, the Second World War has passed for X number of years. Who remember that? So I don't really care about too much political tensions. Maybe for some people's life, for 20 years is long, but economists or economic driving force is the thing.
Another is about Chinacentrism, that this is a Chinese initiative, that is everything about China, Chinese investors, Chinese funds, then the risks also shared by China, and also Chinese equipment, Chinese standards. Is that really the way how it's going to be?
I can give you an example. When we are spending our time on a lake in Austria, and there's a small city called Villach. And we happened to give a talk last year, and the mayor, they learned that we are writing a book about the Silk Road. And just yesterday, she was telling us how fond they are, how they are bonding up with Trieste and want to be in the loop of the Silk Road, and how this three-country corner, it's called Italy, Slovenia, and Austria, how they are all trying to adapt and to see where are our opportunities and how can we make the best link to be on one of the roads. But we have so many negative movements politically, economically, that to give hope, to give a goal where I can work to, whether it's Africa, whether it's, we've been in Costa Rica, and they are already very much counting on the impact that the Silk Road will have. Also, for one reason, because they don't feel, they feel a little more self-confidence now towards the US. So if we look at all of that, and if you listen to what the people say, of course there are concerns. Of course, the more countries you have involved, the more players are in the game, the more can things go wrong or temporarily be a little interrupted?
But really, is it the process of everybody catering or adapting to Chinese standards, and everything has to be called China with a family name?
It's never should be a thing to be worried, because 60 years ago when the Marshall Plan was launched, and then, of course, something in Americans, rock and rolls, for instance, was accepted worldwide, which is, I don't feel any discomfort. But other things, not necessarily all the American culture, American this and American that. So it's going to be mixed conclusions. I'm a Chinese. I think a bland Chinese that will prove in the long term to be just a host. It's nothing important.
Jake?
We know that globally China has ambitions to be a significant player in 5G, both in China and then internationally. By rolling out fifth-generation telecommunications networks in the Belt and Road countries, that will give them an opportunity to show how effective that technology can be. It will also win over converts in those countries to be able to advocate on China's behalf internationally. So obviously 4G was dominated by large US multinational companies. There's certainly going to be a role for Huawei and other Chinese multinational companies to play a role in the future as well. Another important area, I think, is China's high-speed rail initiatives. I wonder, though, however, and I'm going to be a little bit, I think that we can both recognize the positive aspects of the Belt and Road and also be critical of some of the details, in that as China develops its high-speed rail outside of China, some of the benefits that it had domestically when developing its domestic networks will not be there. One, cheap labor. Two, China has always had the opportunity when a rail line was coming through a local village, they could relocate people to other areas and give them compensation for their homes. It's unclear whether those opportunities will be available in some of the countries that they're building for.
Yeah, Claire, please.
No, I think Jake raises a good point. I mean, it's very different territories that China's going to be working with, but I think they are making an effort to engage. I just look at the engineering expertise that China developed when building the railway to Lhasa. You have permafrost experts. Most countries really don't have this engineering technology. So I think actually it's not about a Chinese way of doing business, a US way, a British way. I think when I heard two colleagues talking the other day and they said, do we work for the Asia boss or do we work for the American? I heard another Chinese guy, he said, oh, you'll prefer the guy with Asian values. So I thought, what does that mean? And then I realized that in America, they cut you if you don't hit it a quarter. In China, they cultivate you so you hit the next quarter of a century. China tends to have a sort of more long-term perspective, and that's why it can make a 40 billion USD investment in the Silk Road Fund. And I really think that China is going to export a new way of doing business. When I talk about Asian business or Chinese business, it's about bottom line. It's about Shuanying. It's about win-win. Everybody at the table is going to get a slice of the cake. And I think this way of doing business is very popular. I work with a lot of our partners in the African offices of our firm. They used to have their global meeting in London. They're now having it in Shanghai and Beijing. Why is that? Because economic opportunity, bottom line, is here. If you want a railway that joins with your port, get China to build it. Business is about connectivity. China is giving them that.
Well, it's a great opportunity, and the ideas is very good.
I'm sorry, I just want to make one quick point.
Go ahead.
The reason that American companies look quarter to quarter is because they're interested in returning the most shareholder value that they possibly can. That ensures efficiencies in the U.S. operating model of our businesses. In China, as you mentioned, they may not have to look quarter to quarter and see the benefit that they're receiving on the stock market, but that also results in inconsistencies in China. We've seen overcapacities in China's domestic SOEs, significant problems institutionally in China's economy. These are brought about because there are not this shareholder, activist, investor activism that's taking into account these companies.
Jake, I've studied economics in the same sort of system as you, and I've spent 10 years in London and 10 years working in Beijing, and I think the world we're in now is one of transparent business. Everybody knows what your return is, not every quarter, every 5 minutes on your WeChat, your Facebook, or your WhatsApp, or with Donald Trump on your Twitter. So we don't need to wait for a quarter. We need to wait to see if the trust is there between the trading partners, which will facilitate the long-term macro projects that Belt and Road is trying to achieve. So if you're talking about let's fire half the staff after 3 months, you're not thinking about how to deliver a project across 30 countries. We're in a new world, Jake. Everyone knows what you're doing right now as you're on TV. And everyone's going to know what you're doing every quarter. But boy, you're not going to achieve a macro project like Belt and Road without a 25-year plan. And so maybe the American way of doing business was relevant last century. China way of relationship-built business is relevant this century, really? And I'm in a law firm.
Really, one of the things that I think China has as an advantage is the continuity of our governance, right? Instead of some of the countries along the Belt and Road or in other parts of the world, every 3-4 years you change your government and everything put on hold, everything has to be reviewed, and if they don't like it, they scrap it. And
yeah, and what do we do? Actually,
this is another risk. This is another concern,
we should do
really.
in the US or in Europe, we should sit down and say, okay, we're very proud of our election-driven political system, but how can we reinvent it so that it's not cut in slices and into a process where everybody proves the other one wrong?
But they're thinking this is a good thing. They're thinking, you know, you made a wrong decision, I am correcting it, just like what President Trump is doing about the Obamacare. He thinks that Obamacare is not good, so he is doing the right thing. But I don't know, in the end, is the American people's medical care improved over the process or is going down?
Well, it is going to be a long, long question. But we have witnessed a serious argument or debate between the business sort of spirit between the American ways and the others, who are focused on the quarter and quarter, maybe weekly profit. But you see, for China, I don't think there is such a tension, of course, the American ways. You could say that, back to 15 years ago when China entering WTO, nobody anticipated.
Yeah.
Nobody. I'm sure. I'm here. And I still remember year 2000, within China, the serious debate that China should not enter WTO. At least 50% of economists disagree.
Yes, I remember those 15 years ago.
Right, 15 years ago. So who are there to say 15 years down the road what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Well, and what's very significant, I think, is that we are talking about globalization and against globalization, but what is happening with the Belt and Road? If you look where globalization brought wealth, it was the coastal lines, it was the countries with high ocean access, and what's happening now with the landlines of the Silk Road. It goes in difficult territory, it has to bridge cultures, it has to overcome many things, but it goes to regions that were economic or are economically underdeveloped. And it gives access to sell, access to markets. And that's a very positive in reinventing globalization.
Yes. Very interesting. You have been watching a special sofa talk addressing the major concerns about the Belt and Road Initiative on The Point with Liu Xin. Thank you for watching, and tomorrow we'll bring you the second part. Do tune in.